All right, everyone. Looks like it's 5 minutes after, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. How you all doing today?
Good, good. Thanks. How are you?
Pretty good. Excited to talk to all of you. So my name is Ernest Ramirez, and I'm going to be presenting the free course for the next two sessions. First, I'll just show you guys a little bit of what I plan on presenting for the next 2 days, and then, sorry, we'll let's repeat that. I'll be doing this on this Monday, and then it'll be someone else, and then I'll be continuing the Monday after that. So this is like what I'll be doing over those 2 days. So to start on day one, I'm gonna be talking a little bit about my role currently. We'll get into how I got into DevOps, and then I kind of want to introduce you guys just to a little bit of how DevOps software developers and QA all interact with each other on a daily basis. And then we'll open it up for questions at the very end. And then on the second day, I'm planning on showing you guys a little bit like what goes into building an app like Netflix, how all that works. And then I'll talk about a little bit about some trends I've been seeing in the DevOps job role. And then we'll do another Q&A at the end of day two. So let's get started. All right, so like I said, my name is Ernest Ramirez. I'm currently an instructor here at TinTech, and I also work as a senior DevOps engineer out in San Diego, California, as my day job. And about for the past 2 years, I've been specializing in applications that run in Kubernetes and migrating applications that aren't in Kubernetes to run there. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into DevOps, what made me get into this role, and why I find it interesting. So hopefully everyone here is potentially interested in going into either DevOps, software development, or QA. But this visual is just kind of what my journey into DevOps looked like. So we'll start at the left. Back in like 2010, I got out of high school. I started going to college for network engineering, network administration. I was not finding too many jobs doing that. So I decided to just get a job in IT, try to work my way up. So I started in help desk, like a lot of other people. Um, Eventually, I got bored, didn't want to be working with employees and customers and answering their tickets. So I decided to start learning more scripting, more server work. Eventually, I got promoted to a systems administrator. At this point, I started doing a lot more server management, working on infrastructure tasks. At the time, I was working heavily in Windows, not too much Linux. So eventually, I started to get bored in system administration too. And one of the big things I wanted was the ability to work from home. Um, I noticed that all of the software developers worked from home. So my next thing I decided to learn was C Sharp, the programming language, and eventually I was able to move into a software development role. I did that for about 2 to 3 years, and it was about that time I started hearing about a job called DevOps that was getting really popular. And so DevOps seemed really interesting to me because I would get the ability to work on Linux and AWS, which was becoming really popular at the time. And also, it kind of seemed like it was the best of both worlds, right? Like I get to work with infrastructure related stuff, and I also get to use my coding skills to build a lot of automation. So at that point, I decided to go all in on learning Linux, AWS. Docker was getting big at that time. And eventually I decided to interview for a DevOps position. And I have currently been working in DevOps now for about 5 years. I was regular DevOps engineer for about 2 of those, and then I was promoted to senior DevOps engineer. And I have no clue what I'm going to do next. We'll find out when that happens. So next is what I like about the DevOps role. So the big thing about me is that I get bored very easy. If I'm working on the same thing every single day, I'm gonna get sick of it. That's the number one thing that I really like about DevOps. There's constantly new stuff to learn. You're never working on the same thing, and it can change drastically from week to week. And so that kind of brings us to the picture on this slide. You guys might have seen this in one of the other previous presentations, but this is basically a representation of many widely used DevOps tools that get used through the entire development process of building code and deploying it out to the customers. And so I show you this because I don't want you to get scared and think someone's going to expect you to know all of this stuff. It's actually impossible for one person to know any of this. I show you this because I want you to get excited, because if you work as DevOps, you're going to get a chance to work with a huge variety of different technologies. And so, like I said, it's also important to mention that these are not all specific to DevOps. Even if you work as like a QA or a software developer, as a good example, all of those roles are going to have to know Git, right? All of those roles might need to know how Jenkins works. So there is a little bit of overlap in the technologies that these 3 roles need to know, but this is a good representation of tools that are used throughout the entire development process. And as DevOps, we get an opportunity to work with all of this stuff. So the second thing I really like about DevOps is that I still get to code. And the big difference, I think, between working as a software developer and DevOps is we're usually not like writing full scale applications for the business, but we still are constantly writing tools for internal use. And these can be anything to automate manual processes and make the actual development process go smoothly and run in an automated fashion to where people aren't doing manual steps. So this is really good because it still allows me to use all my coding skills that I used as a software developer and keep all of this stuff fresh in my mind. And so the last thing I really like about DevOps is that it's a very open role. So in my current position, we have the ability to influence decisions as to what technology we use to solve a problem. Of course, we need to actually prove that this is going to be a good solution and save us money in the long run and be worth it. But if we can do that, our company is all in on letting us decide what we use to solve a problem. And that's huge for me because I don't know, sometimes you might find some new technology that seems like it would do things better. And usually most places are totally open to listening to you and letting you use that if you can make a case for it. So that's really exciting for me. And another thing I just want to mention is, like, as DevOps, we get to work on a lot of exciting new technology. Like, I've been working heavily in Kubernetes and I find it really interesting and fun. And of course, if you find this stuff interesting and fun, then it's not going to be as stressful and annoying at work. Now, on the other hand, I want to talk a little bit about my experience working as a software developer. So when I was working as a developer, what I found is that you'll largely be doing project-based work. And what I mean by this is that you might get assigned to some internal team who owns a portion of the application, and you'll continue to work on that until either it's done being developed or you get reassigned to another team. So to give you a good example, maybe you're working at Instagram as a software developer and you get assigned to work on the team working on the Reels feature. you're probably going to work on this for the near future until you either get reassigned or that feature goes away. So it's largely long scale projects in software development. Whereas on the other hand, in DevOps, I'm constantly doing different stuff every week. Like one week I might be writing Terraform code to build AWS infrastructure. The next week I might be working on migrating Java applications into Kubernetes. And the next week I might be working on Jenkins pipelines. Like this stuff varies as DevOps and it can change from week to week. And another big difference is like I said, as a developer, you might get placed onto a team for a feature, like the Instagram Reels team. It's kind of different as DevOps because I mainly get put into these teams temporarily to work with them on some kind of project, and then I switch over to a different project. So they're a bit different pace for each role. The other big difference I want to mention is that as a software engineer, you're largely going to be solving problems. So if you really enjoy working on like logical problems and using your brain to figure these things out and building things out of nothing, you might enjoy software development more. And that's not to say we don't do that stuff as DevOps, but as a developer, really your main focus is going to be solving problems. And of course, as a developer, you're going to be responsible for all of this stuff. You're going to be responsible for figuring out the answers to all the questions and successfully implementing all that stuff in code. So as an example, if you are working on Instagram, they might just come to you and say, hey, we're looking for a new Reels feature. This is what we want it to do. And it's then all on you to figure that out and successfully write the code for it. So a bit different roles, but I really liked working in both of them and they were both a lot of fun. So what do I do here at TenTech? Just wanted to briefly mention this. I'm an instructor here. I'm currently teaching the Kubernetes classes, and I'll also be teaching the final project at the end of all the classes. And basically, I'm here to share my knowledge and experience deploying high traffic applications in Kubernetes and demystify what Kubernetes actually does as a platform. So if you guys were to come here, that's what I would be doing. Okay, so next I just wanted to talk a little bit about how DevOps software developers and QA interact with each other. So I think this is a good representation because all of these guys are constantly working together hand in hand on a daily basis. So you might have guessed it. DevOps software developers and QA are constantly collaborating every single day on the process of building software and getting it out to our customers. So I kind of like to focus on three areas here. First, we'll talk about how DevOps and software developers interact. Then I'll talk about DevOps and QA. And then we'll talk a little bit about QA and developers. So first of all, DevOps and software developers, they work all the way from the beginning when the code's being planned and designed, all the way to the end when it's being deployed into production. So when it's being designed, we're relying on each other's knowledge to choose the best technologies and design the software in a way that makes sense and is not wasting money or using technology that doesn't fit. A good example of this is like maybe our developers are trying to deploy a database in some way that doesn't make sense. They're relying on us as developers or as DevOps to check them and tell them, this design doesn't make sense. We need to do this instead. So those two are constantly working together in the actual design of the application. And then they're also figuring out how to automate the building of the developers' codes and then automate the actual code going out to the customers. DevOps job is to automate that whole process and make it go smoothly and make our developers' lives easier. So next, DevOps and QA. So really this relationship is mostly about automated tests and how we can get those to run by themselves. DevOps and QA work really closely to set up tests that kick off automatically as part of the process of the code getting built and going out. This is obviously important because we don't want to run this stuff manually. We can't run it manually. A lot of these systems are very big and can have hundreds of tests. So DevOps and QA are working hand in hand to automate the whole testing process in the building and deploying of software. And then QA and developers is also very important because developers are the ones who write the code and they know how it works, right? So QA does not know this stuff. So these two are working together to figure out what needs to be tested, how it needs to get tested, and implement the testing strategy. And then last but not least, you might have already guessed this, but developers are pretty much important the entire step of the way, from when the application gets designed all the way to when it goes out to production. These guys are vital everywhere. Obviously, DevOps isn't going to design the code, so these two need to work very closely and to figure these things out. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the challenges you might face in each of these roles. So a big one I hear about from developers is keeping up with different technologies. Especially today, there's so much new stuff coming out, and I'm not even only talking about software stuff. Developers are kind of expected to keep up with all their latest software frameworks in whatever language they're programming in. And then they're also expected to know like what is going on in AWS, what new technologies are in AWS. They might even need to know like a little bit of Terraform and some DevOps tools as well. So basically, why I mention this is that this constantly requires that you keep learning over and over. It never stops. And keeping up with this stuff can be challenging and time consuming. Some people find this really fun though, and they actually like keeping up with all this stuff. The other challenge I think developers face is testing and debugging. A big part of your job as a software developer is going to be fixing the bugs that QA finds. And as you might expect, this can be annoying. It can be like chasing down a needle in a haystack. And sometimes these things can be so time consuming that they can cause delays in the software going out, and that's never fun. And the last major challenge is just collaboration and communication. In today's world, developers can't really just lock themselves in a room and not talk to anyone else. They need to constantly be working with DevOps and QA, and this can be a challenge, especially if your company is completely remote. You really need to like set aside time for all of this stuff and spend time forming these relationships with the other teams. Okay, so now I want to talk about some challenges facing DevOps that are pretty common. So the first one is automation. The automation surrounding the software development lifecycle, which means building software, designing it, deploying it to production. This all gets really complex and time consuming. There's a lot of moving parts, and as DevOps, we're expected to automate this entire process. So as you can expect, this can be a lot. We need to automate everything from building the infrastructure, building the code, deploying the code, running the tests. It's a lot of stuff. The next thing to mention is security and compliance. DevOps, a lot of the time, is creating the infrastructure code and building the actual infrastructure. So what this means is that security is counting on us to actually integrate the security best practices. And this, of course, can be time consuming. It can slow down the software being developed. And in addition, it's a moving target. Like there is constantly new software vulnerabilities being introduced. And so that pretty much comes down onto DevOps as to they're the people who need to integrate this stuff in the entire process. And then the last one is the exact same as software development, collaboration and communication. Just as challenging for DevOps as it is for software developers. This requires constant communication and working with the other teams. And like I said, in today's world, a lot of places are completely remote. So it's not like you can just walk up to someone's desk and start talking to them. You need to be talking with them on Slack and booking meetings and all that, and it can be time consuming. And last but not least, some challenges for QA. So one thing I commonly hear is that QA has limited time and resources. At some places, QA is kind of like an afterthought. And what this means is that these guys are often given not a lot of time to finish their testing, and they can have really tight deadlines. And what this means is that QA might miss bugs or not have sufficient testing if they don't have enough time to do everything they need to do. The other challenge I often hear for QA is load testing. And so what I mean by this is that testing something like Instagram Reels or Netflix, where millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of users worldwide are using it simultaneously, this can be very difficult to actually simulate in a test environment. And so this, of course, can lead to bugs that aren't always caught by the other forms of testing. And these things can only become apparent when they actually go out to hundreds of millions of people. And then, of course, the last thing is communication and collaboration. QA needs to constantly be talking with DevOps in terms of automating their tests that happen when the code actually gets built and goes out. And then they also need to constantly be talking with the developers so they know what needs to be tested. If the developers introduce a new feature, they need to know about that and they need to implement testing for it. So my last slide is kind of just a cool image I found. I think this is a good representation of where DevOps sits in all of this. They're kind of the glue holding everything together. None of these things would be possible without all three of these roles. So as DevOps, our whole job is to make the building and deploying of software easier for all the jobs involved. And we work to automate the entire process and make this very simple for our developers and QA. And I think that's all my slides. I'd like to open it up for Q&A now. Feel free to ask me whatever's on your mind. Go ahead.
Hey guys, thank you, Ernest, for taking time and presenting it. It was really great. As you guys can see, we tried to make presentations and all these talks to be able to provide to a wide range of people. So it might have been maybe some of our presentations might have been really easy and easy to understand, but some of the presentations are a little bit more technical because, like I said, we wanted to give like a good info sessions and information to people out there. So hope you guys enjoyed it. If no one else has a question, I think I might ask a question.
I
Ernest.
have a question.
Great, go
Okay,
ahead.
go ahead.
Is it Dinara?
Yes, it's me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your lesson, Ernest, but I have two questions. I don't know, it's just based on my knowledge that I know. It's not about the